It's Thursday, December 28th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It is a hell of a day to talk ball, and joining me to do just that is the one and only Dalton Del Don. Dalton, what's going on, buddy?
What's up, Harmon? In recovery mode a bit here. Took the family to the Monday night game, Christmas. It wasn't bad enough, the Ravens spoiling my son's first football game, but Brock Purdy, just seeing my MVP ticket go up in flames in prime time, that wasn't great. Then I drive home, have to write about it, do a little recap of what I just witnessed. And then I start not feeling too well right afterward and picked up some food poisoning at the game and was laying in bed all day Tuesday, adding injury to insult. So, it wasn't the greatest last couple days for me, but we move on, Harmon. How are you doing, my man?
Brutal, man. I'm sorry to hear that your day at the 49ers stadium ended in such a horrific fashion on multiple fronts. But I'm glad you're feeling better. I'm glad you're with us on the pod. I'm doing well. I'm ready for Week 17, man. This is it. This is championship week for basically everybody out there. It's the last big fantasy content week. And we got some big games on the slate, man. That is for sure. And we actually have a lot of news to get to throughout the show today because, man, it was talk about just a mess. Adding insult to injury, there was a lot of benchings out there in the NFL today. We'll get to all of those as we talk through every single team because it is Stat Nerd Thursday. And we not only talk about every single team, we give you one stat you need to know for all 32 teams. We go in order of the standings, the projected 2024 NFL draft order, courtesy of Tankathon. That brings us to the first overall team here, the Carolina Panthers. Hey, we actually get to say something nice about the Panthers, even in a losing effort. Bryce Young had multiple career and season best numbers last week against the Green Bay Packers, 9.78 adjusted yards per attempt and a 110 passer rating for Bryce Young. Again, those were both the best numbers of his season. DJ Chark even coming alive. Who could have seen that coming? But really, Dalton, how much of this is good for Bryce Young? But man, that Packers defense is really, really bad.
Yeah, just the second top 10 finish, fantasy QB finish this season for Bryce Young. One takeaway is maybe we've seen the end of Mingo leading this team in targets. Chark totally dominated there. Mingo was just not doing anything with them. Yeah, my takeaway was more Green Bay's defense is in trouble with some injuries. It was nice to see Bryce Young being capable of a performance like this. But I'm still, ranking him as a bottom 5 fantasy QB this week. And it's more to do with Green Bay's defense was my takeaway.
Second overall team, Arizona Cardinals. They've moved up in the draft order here. Kyler Murray has a 6.4 average depth of throw the last 2 weeks. Running backs accounted for 14 of his 38 targets, 37%. Last week in a losing effort against the Chicago Bears. This team is just so bereft of offensive talent. We've talked about it. I think at this point, they're probably the favorite to draft Marvin Harrison because it sounds like they're going to stick with Kyler Murray, which, man, they really do need an infusion of talent there on the offensive side because with Michael Wilson and Marquise Brown suffering through injuries in the back half of the year, it's just a really rough group. And even Trey McBride got a little shut down against the Bears.
Yeah, right. The week I hyped my guy, Trey McBride, and you didn't see that come in there. But it happens with tight ends. Go right back to McBride this week. You could treat him as a number 1 fantasy tight end. The Eagles are allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So Murray has an okay matchup here. You figure they're going to be throwing a lot, 10.5 point dogs. But yeah, I think it's a question, the quarterback position or Marvin Harrison. What a dilemma there. But it's going to be an interesting one. We'll see in the draft. But Kyler Murray as a passer, still in developmental mode at this stage of his career. I don't know. He's certainly a different evaluation when we look at him as a fantasy player than in a real life quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, they're in a position to get a team like the next team we're going to talk about or the team after them, Washington and New England, to maybe jump up to that second overall pick. If they're comfortable with Murray, they can get a couple of extra draft assets if they want to entice one of those teams to move up for Drake May, if the Bears go Caleb Williams at number 1 overall. So there's a lot of ways the Cardinals could go. They could also just stick and pick one of those guys and then trade Kyler Murray. I think they'd get some offers for Murray, but I wonder... I guess Murray would in totality net them more in return, but I would also just again be tempted to see Murray with a full off season, full year in the offense, with full health and everything like that, and also some real wide receivers.
Yeah,
the
I was
guys
going
he's
to
throwing
say
to right now.
In his defense, Hollywood Brown isn't healthy. Michael Wilson's our number one receiver. Yeah, the guys he's throwing to right now is bottom of the barrel, totally.
Yeah, let's see what he does against the Eagles this week, because that obviously has been one of the biggest and best matchups for quarterbacks of late. So we'll see what he can do this week against that secondary. Third overall team, Washington Commanders. They're one of the teams in the news today. Sam Howell has been officially benched for Jacoby Brissett. Ron Rivera announced that this morning. Disingenuous stat alert. But our stat for the Commanders, Jacoby Brissett leads the NFL with a 146.8 passer rating and a 12.4 adjusted net yards per attempt the last 2 weeks. Now, he's not started either of those games. That's why it's a little bit disingenuous, but there's no doubt about it. Like when he's gotten onto the field for Washington, he has lit it up from a production standpoint and fought them back into both of those games as well.
Brissett had a touchdown drive on his final 2 drives against the Rams and then his first 3 against the Jets. 5 straight drives led by Brissett were touchdowns. And then, frankly, the 6th was 3 straight runs that they were trying to run out at the end of that game. So he is, his full drives, he's 5 for 5 scoring TDs. Now, coming in relief's different than when the defense can prepare for you, but it's quite clear that he deserves a shot at starting this week instead of Howell. I kind of expected that. My 49ers will be upset coming off that loss, but they're traveling during a short week. And, Brissett is certainly, so I expect the spread to shorten from 13.5, given the Brissett news. It's a big line for the road, but obviously Niners going to be upset. But dealing with a ton of injuries on their offensive line, wouldn't be shocked if Brissett keeps that game close.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's kind of tempting to wonder what Jacoby Brissett would have been like over the course of the whole season. I mean, obviously, like as a Terry McLaurin backer, a Dotson backer, a Samuel backer, I kind of wish we'd seen something from Jacoby Brissett. My main takeaway here is just like, look, and you can say the same thing about Russ later on when we get to him in the show. We talk about the Broncos. There were again, presumably real people on the internet, like ready to fight you to the end, that despite some warning signs, like, that there, despite some clear fraudulence in the wins for the Broncos and 2 for Howell, the passing production, like, these guys were secretly great. There were clearly some fraudulence, like the Broncos were not winning games because Russ was taking them over, and the Commanders weren't putting up all these passing yards because Sam Howell was secretly a great player. I think it's probably over for Russ. Again, we'll talk about him in a second, like as a viable starting quarterback in the NFL. I think Sam Howell is perfectly fine in the, I keep saying the Ryan Fitzpatrick mold. Like he gets in there he's a backup. He's a spot starter. He can really help you in put up big production numbers from a passing standpoint. I just don't think we saw much from him this season to think like he's Washington's future. I imagine that if they stick and pick at the 2nd or 3rd overall spot, wherever they end up, they are taking Drake May, or Caleb Williams, I guess, if Drake goes number 1. Anything could happen, but I think they're firmly on rookie quarterback watch if they pick this high.
Yeah, Howell was more fun when he was taking a bunch of sacks. Ron Rivera, total coach speak, saying, giving him a breather here. And again, it's just dramatic, the 5 touchdowns we've seen after Howell's departed these games recently, just the difference in the passing second. Why is he not featuring McLaurin more? So as much as I like to be a backer like your dad of Sam Howell, it looks like his future in the NFL is of the backup variety.
Yeah, no, I think honestly the fact that Jacoby Brissett gets in there and plays pretty well is a sign, partly not that just how, not like a big thing on Howell. I think they put way too much on his plate. Like they want him to make full field reads. They don't really run a lot of routes that make a lot of sense together. They don't give him like easy designed throws to his number 1 guy, like which should just be Terry McLaurin. Like that's a lot to put on a quarterback who's very, very early in his starting journey. So while he's been able to produce a lot of numbers, it just hasn't led to like a successful, really strong offense. So like a veteran guy like Jacoby Brissett, who's seen it all, who's been in multiple offenses, who's worked with a lot of different players, I think there's a reason he can get in there and play pretty well. I expect him to play pretty well if he has to finish the season out these next 2 games. Just
quickly move on to this team, but this week without maybe Chris Rodriguez and Brian Robinson, no running backs, Brissett $20 minimum, Yahoo DFS. We're going to have some real interesting quarterback options in DFS this week. Tyrod Taylor, just some minimum guys if you want to go that route.
Yeah, I like Brissett in that way. Number 4 overall team, New England Patriots. Ezekiel Elliott's 27.2% target share ranks 12th among all pass catchers the last 3 weeks. Man, Bailey Zappi loves himself some passes to Zeke Elliott these last few games.
Yeah, you know that he was going to bounce back after busting everyone last week. Zeke is getting all the touches. If Stevenson remains out, he's a locked-in RB2, regardless of matchup. Even against Buffalo as big dogs, you're going to see all those targets. So I'm still using him even in the tough matchup, and I'm sure the projected low team total. He's just getting all those crucial touches and most of the work at the goal line. I know when he lost that touchdown a couple weeks ago, it was from the 10 even. So I'm expecting Zeke to get the high value touches there.
It was pretty funny to see the different reactions between Bailey Zappi versus Bill Belichick when that winning field goal went in. Like, Bailey Zappi was jacked up and Bill Belichick's just kind of staring around, because I don't think Bill's going to be the coach of this team for much longer. I wonder how the fans feel when they win that game. And it's like, oh, damn, now we're picking 4th overall when we could be looking at like the Drake May Photoshops and stuff like that.
And pat on both our backs for warning people in Survivor to avoid that game. We gave you the Bears instead. Remember Sunday night? You were on it with me there. That was a trap, that Broncos game. The Patriots have a good defense. I was not shocked at all to see that game be competitive.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the Broncos offense in just a second. But first, number 5 overall team, New York Giants. They also benched their quarterback. Tommy DeVito was benched for Tyrod Taylor. Taylor came in relief of Tommy DeVito in week 16 on Christmas Day. DeVito took 8 sacks for 59 yards lost in week 16. Meanwhile, Tyrod Taylor was sacked 0 times. And this team is obviously just playing out the string, but I understand why they had kind of seen enough of the Tommy DeVito experience and just went back to Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah, even when they were winning, he was just kind of getting it done by scrambling and not really necessarily how something that was going to last. The Rams, over the last 5 weeks, have allowed the second most schedule-adjusted fantasy points to quarterbacks. By the way, the Rams, when they're all their stars are on the field, they have like the number 1 EPA too. So anyway, set up here is for Tyrod Taylor to score some fantasy points because he also runs. So I love him in DFS. I love him in Superflex as a pickup. I'm using him in a championship league, adding him in a Superflex, using him right away. So, that's my takeaway here. Oh, Darius Slayton has a high target rate with Tyrod Taylor, small sample this year too. So if you really want to do a cheap stack, Slayton and Taylor, pay up for McCaffrey in a big bounce back spot, something like that in DFS.
I like that call. 6th overall team, Los Angeles Chargers. Austin Eckler played 43 snaps in week 16. Isaiah Spiller played 15. Josh Kelly played 7. Both backups had single-digit carry share and target share on the offense in week 16. Look, I don't think this is actually that surprising because, I mean, typically it's like, oh, you want to get a look at the younger guys. Eckler's not going to be on the team next year. I mean, dude, these guys really are not good. I mean, Kelly and Isaiah Spiller, I don't think either of them are starter quality. Eckler's going to be free agent next year. Kelly's not going to be on the team next year. He's a free agent. And Isaiah Spiller's going to be the only guy there. Like, they're a serious candidate to add some players in that backfield next season.
Oh, yeah, big time. Eckler, solid matchup this week. The Broncos are also vulnerable to receiving backs, so you can use them if you want to. He did with the new coach. He saw most of the running back opportunities. There was no change there, so we know he's not playing at 100%, but he's getting the high value touches, and if you need him, you can use him in this spot. But I would be surprised if the Chargers don't have a completely revamped backfield next year. And hopefully Eckler, finds a spot that he can totally still be valuable both in NFL and in fantasy with a healthy Eckler, in a different spot, because I think clearly the problem with him is just trying to play through this ankle injury this year.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, high ankle sprain's a serious injury. He did come back pretty fast from it. Obviously has a lot of motivation to not miss games. I think that's probably why. So we'll see where he ends up. I think he could at least be like a role player on passing downs next year, like at the very least in kind of like a committee type 2 running back situation.
And if anyone missed the clip on your podcast, one of the last couple ones with you, it was illuminating when you talked about how he saw that his GPS was 13 miles per hour and everyone making fun of him on that clip because his ankle was so taped up, and he went and he recorded himself the next day at 20 miles an hour to make sure he's not. So that was interesting insight.
Yeah, I definitely would go back and listen to that if you haven't listened to the most recent episode of Eckler's Edges a couple weeks ago. Number 7 overall team, Tennessee Titans. Ryan Tannehill ranked 29th in adjusted net yards per attempt among quarterbacks in week 16. Getting Tannehill out there, not good. I galaxy brained myself into starting Tannehill in the league that we're in together, the injury-prone league, where I lost to the semifinals. Wouldn't have helped me anyways if I'd played Bailey Zappi over Ryan Tannehill, but he did not provide any sort of upgrade. I don't think Tannehill is going to be like somebody that and look, it's a bad offensive line. I still see Tannehill as a guy that's like bandied about as a potential starter for teams next year. I don't know if we're at that point with Ryan Tannehill anymore.
Oh, he's been brutal this year all season long. I think he looks like he's entering backup mode for the rest of his career. Houston has allowed the third most schedule-adjusted fantasy points to QBs the last 5 weeks, but I think DeAndre Hopkins fantasy managers are hoping Levis makes a surprise return.
8th overall team, Chicago Bears. There was a lot of Roschon Johnson chatter when Deonta Foreman was ruled out with a personal issue in week 16. Well, not so fast, because Khalil Herbert played 52% of the snaps, led the team. 51.3% of the team rush attempts, led the team. And he ran just one fewer route than Johnson. So he really kind of surprisingly returned for a monster role in week 16.
It was a perfect setup for my guy Herbert. Leader in rush yards over expectation last year. Horrible season for him, though. That he might have, right when he was coming on, he suffered that injury in which Justin Fields just missed him on that pass. But I digress. Foreman, a surprise scratch for personal reasons. DJ Moore, injured on the first drive and just a decoy the rest of the game, sadly, as someone used him in DFS. Cole Kmet leaves the second half with an injury. Bob Tunyon may be a sleeper this week. So it was a perfect setup for Herbert. Oh, also, by the way, at home against by far the most favorable matchup for fantasy backs. So it was a perfect storm for him, and who knows if Foreman returns this week. And I don't know. I know people love Roschon Johnson, but to me, he's the third best back in this backfield. He's the passing down back, and Herbert really struggles in pass protection.
Yes.
But between the tackles or running, it's not even close. It's Herbert, and the team loves Foreman too. So we'll see what happens this week. They're facing an incredibly tough Falcons. They're a run funnel defense because they're also tough against wideouts, but they're really tough against the run, as we saw Jonathan Taylor struggle last week. And now if Foreman comes back, it's a situation probably to avoid in fantasy. But the other thing to pay attention to here is DJ Moore's health. I mean, is he just going to be a decoy with that ankle now or what? But that was frustrating. He suffered it right away, had a huge wrap on it, and then returned, and I was pumped, but he was basically a decoy.
Yeah, DJ Moore has played a lot against those Atlanta Falcons over the years in Carolina. So we'll actually get to the Falcons next. They're the 10th overall team. We're skipping the 9th overall team, New York Jets, because they're playing on Thursday night. So Atlanta Falcons, 10th overall team here. Jonnu Smith tied Drake London with a 21.1% first read target share, according to Fantasy Points data in week 16. I mean, terrific. Just wonderful stuff there. We're still getting Jonnu Smith the ball on these designer plays. Definitely had enough of the Falcons. Even Bijan Robinson he's just sitting there in the end zone. Probably got to keep his feet in bounds on that play. But
it was both their faults. Yeah, throw the ball earlier and also have some spatial awareness. Yeah.
Yes, correct. Yeah, don't go full receiver, not knowing where the boundary is there. So yeah, that was a little bit on both of them.
He's the opposite of Amari Cooper. He's the opposite of Amari Cooper on the sideline.
Yes, yes. But yeah, look, I'm sick of this Falcons offense all the same. I wonder if they'll be playing against their quarterback next year when Justin Fields goes against them in week 16. Although I saw a lot of people suggest Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson are going to make the weirdest offense possible in 2024. There is a part of me that can see that in my mind's eye. But yeah, again, for now, I don't know what to really say about the Falcons because they're the Falcons.
Well, the weird thing about the Jonnu Smith is Tucker Fisk was actually getting more snaps than Jonnu Smith if you were really pay attention to box scores, and then suddenly Jonnu becomes a feature part of their offense. So it is weird, this coaching staff. This week they go on the road to face a Bears defense that's first in EPA per play since week 11, since trading for Montez Sweat. So it's a tougher matchup outdoors for your Falcons. But yeah, the Bijan roller coaster has been a fun one. Last week he produced, yet had fewer carries than Patterson and Algier combined.
Number 11 overall team, New Orleans Saints. They ranked 21st in weighted DVOA. They're kind of falling apart here as the season ends, especially on defense. I pointed this out on FFL last week, and I think on this show too, that their rush defense has really particularly fallen on hard times. They're going to go against the Bucs this week. They're not going to have Marshawn Lattimore to get the worst out of Mike Evans. So man, Saints really are just petering towards the end of the season, and I don't really know what the offseason is going to look like for them either.
Yeah, at least Derek Carr put up a big fantasy game against the Rams, and Olave getting
classic
involved.
Derek Carr, by the way.
The Rams are a very favorable matchup for him to do so as well. But yeah, they're a tough team to figure out. The Saints. You look at that spread, and it's just 3 points against who's going to bet on New Orleans. So I picked them in my stat pick segment because sometimes you split. They lost the first time they faced Tampa Bay. So I could see them bouncing back and winning here just because Tampa Bay looked so good last week and everyone's writing off New Orleans because that's what happens in this division too. So Carr, Olave, maybe you're probably using them, maybe a consideration in DFS, but yeah, and Alvin Kamara routinely getting ranked a little bit more high than he's producing, but you're using him obviously.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's tough because this team's going to look pretty similar to how they look this year or next year, right? Chris Olave, not had a perfect second season. I think anybody would be willing to say that, but he still cleared 80 catches. He cleared 1,000 yards this year. He has 4 touchdowns. I wonder, he's going to have Derek Carr as his quarterback next year, so he's going to be a very interesting guy to rank in 2024. 12th overall team, Green Bay Packers. They're actually in the news today. Not just a bunch of quarterbacks getting sent to the bench. Packers cornerback Jair Alexander is suspended 1 game for conduct detrimental to the team. If you missed this story, it's actually pretty wild. He was not announced as a team captain, but he went out for the coin toss anyways, and then called it and said, like, we want to go on defense, which isn't like you're supposed to say we defer to the other team, and then they pick usually and the ref even said to him, like, are you sure? And he's like, I guess, I don't know. You like kind of the ref had to save him from making this big mistake. It's a pretty wild thing. If you haven't seen it yet, you can dive a little deeper into the story. Not a big fantasy storyline because it is wild that the defense is in so much chaos. Some of the expensive veterans on the team, just weird vibes with like him and David Bakhtiari. You know, obviously he's on IR. He's been out for the season. So it's wild. But at the same time, while there's all this chaos on defense, while there's all this kind of like weirdness with some of the guys who've been around this team for a while, the offense really, I just couldn't say many more better things about them. Jordan Love the last 2 weeks, where he kind of went through a little bit of a slump there in a couple games after riding high off that Chiefs win. He's even been dealing with injuries in the skill position groups. Dontavian Wicks was in a great spot last week with Jaden Reed out. Then he gets hurt mid-game. Despite all that, the last 2 weeks, Jordan Love, 9th in adjusted net yards per attempt among quarterbacks and 8th in passer rating the last 2 weeks.
Impressive against the Carolina defense that's shut down opposing fantasy quarterbacks. I mean, it's in part due to game script, but they also have pretty good cornerbacks. So especially dealing with those injured receivers, an impressive performance from Love. Nice to see Aaron Jones back getting a full allotment of snaps. 8 carries in the red zone for Aaron Jones. So he's due for more touchdown luck. You love to see him back healthy, probably with fantasy managers out of the playoffs, but nice to see. Now a tougher matchup in Minnesota, but yeah, it's a tough team to figure out, and we got to pay attention to the injuries on these wideouts. But Jordan Love, big performance last week.
Next team up here, 13th overall, Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders defense ranks 1st in EPA per play allowed and 15th in success rate since week 13. And I saw JJ Zacharyson note that since Antonio Pierce took over as the Raiders head coach, their defense and special teams unit is 1st in fantasy points scored per game. It's a wild turnaround for a group that, like, come into the year, it's like, they have Max Crosby and a bunch of other dudes. They've gotten big plays out of Jack Jones, who obviously was a former New England Patriot. They've gotten big plays out of him. They've gotten defensive touchdowns, which is boosting up the EPA here and the fantasy scoring. But again, they've become like a perfectly viable, solid NFL defense. And again, they make big plays on these turnovers, which boosts the EPA and the fantasy scoring.
Yeah, very impressive and certainly surprising me for sure, this performance from the Raiders defense. I know we all are frustrated with the broken Kansas City offense, but Vegas deserves some credit for last week's performance. Max Crosby, should he be the defensive player of the year? The guy never misses a snap, returning after like literally having his knee drained in the hospital day of games earlier this season. I mean, he's just a beast, and you double him and he still provides pressure on, like, say, Hail Mary situations. He's really awesome, man.
Awesome.
He really should be strongly considered defensive player of the year. So yeah, and now you look at the matchups this week, and you look at the Colts, and it's like, oh, maybe a home matchup isn't necessarily a smash for Taylor, Jonathan Taylor, by the way, that thumb injury may be preventing him from getting any catches too. So yeah, impressive work with Pierce and what the Raiders have done on D.
Yeah, I think Pierce has done enough to keep that job. Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator, probably should stick around too after this performance. You can look at like maybe bringing in somebody different from a play caller perspective. Although I think they've been solid on offense, given they're starting like a day 3 rookie quarterback. I do think there's some overhaul that needs to be done on the offensive side, but the Raiders are not as far away as I might have thought. I think they just needed to get the energy vampire Josh McDaniels and then that whole crew out of there. But this is like a totally different vibe, totally different culture. I mean, Max Crosby, he's beasting in the games. He's smoking cigars in the locker room. It's pretty wild. So I think he is. I agree with you. He's one of my favorite players in the league. Great story, the whole thing with him. So the more shine he can get, the better in my book. And yeah, I think they're a streamer candidate. Like the Raiders defense is a streamer candidate against the Colts. And because we'll talk about Gardner Minshew later, coming off one of his least inspiring games. But 14th overall team, Denver Broncos. Russell Wilson was benched this morning. It was one of those where like it leaked out that they were thinking about benching him. And then like 15 minutes, it was announced that they're going to sit him this coming week. Tom Pelissero notes that the reason this is happening, Russell Wilson is due $39 million fully guaranteed in 2024, another $37 million guaranteed in 2025 for injury only until the 5th day of the league year in 2024. That's again when it would fully vest. So benching him now sets up the financial decision for the Russell Wilson era in a couple of months. Essentially, if he was to get hurt these final 2 games, his 25 salary would be fully guaranteed. And look, there's nothing about the way Russ has played this year, despite some decent numbers at points. They're clearly playing like they got to hide him. And that offense is a mess, man. My stat for the Broncos this week, the wide receiver tight end routes in week 16 after Cortland Sutton left with a concussion following 2 routes. Jerry Jeudy, 35, Brandon Johnson, 28, Lil Jordan Humphrey, 22, Marvin Mims, 19, Adam Troutman, 14, Lucas Krull, 13. I mean, that's got to be one of the lightest and least inspiring pass catching groups in the NFL, and a quarterback that you need to hide and you need to manage. That's why this offense has just been pretty, again, don't care what any of the numbers say. It's been a rough watch this year.
The writing has been on the wall since the preseason, frankly. Peyton made Stidham the highest paid backup in the league, I believe. And he attempted it with Wilson, who does have a 15-1 touchdown INT ratio at home, but a career low 6.9 YPA. The offense does nothing. He leads the league in checkdowns by a wide margin, and Sutton's bailing him out in the red zone, frankly. So, this isn't surprising, and Russell Wilson's clearly not going to be in Denver moving forward. Stidham, another DFS minimum option here in a favorable matchup, although if Sutton misses this game, it's an ugly wide receiver core, and you said tight ends and everyone there. Jeudy, just a disaster of a season, stayed healthy and no touchdowns all season, 1 touchdown all season long. Hasn't even earned 7 targets, more than 7 targets in the game all year. I mean, not good, man. Not good. But Stidham, we're going to get an audition here for the rest of the year, but Denver, another team looking for their future at the quarterback position.
Yeah, and Mims has been a disaster as a rookie too. Like he's just not there as a route runner. Like there's a reason he's 4th on this team in routes run, despite the fact Cortland Sutton obviously did not finish that game. 15th overall team, Minnesota Vikings. Vikings had a 15% drop back rate over expectation, according to Fantasy Life data. That is easily their highest of the post Kirk Cousins era. There's some matchup stuff here. Obviously your boy Nick Mullins, man, he is Dr. Chaos back there behind center, but that's all we want out of this offense from a fantasy perspective. Unfortunately, now they're banged up here with Jordan Addison on the injury report. TJ Hawkinson is probably going to miss time into next year with a multi-ligament injury in his knee. So, I mean, Justin Jefferson, how is he not? If Nick Mullins stays under center and they keep dropping back like this, how is Justin Jefferson not going to get like 20 targets in a game?
Yeah, Jefferson has a clear argument to be the top fantasy wideout this week. My guy Mullins, I predicted top 10 fantasy QB last week. I think he was 12th, despite throwing 4 picks, 411 yards. But yeah, 4 picks and two fumbles, not great. But the 411 yards got it done for fantasy. And he has another favorable matchup this week against the aforementioned Packers secondary, dealing with no Alexander also. So on the other hand, as you said, no Hawkinson and Addison. So a healthy Addison would certainly help Mullins. The other issue there with Minnesota is we don't even know who's starting at quarterback. It's still it could be Hall or Dobbs. So you're avoiding the quarterback position there. And I'm firing up Chandler, who, even though it didn't result in the box score, a tough matchup last week, easier one this week. And with Madison's return, O'Connell stuck to his word, and Chandler was the workhorse there. I preliminarily have him ranked as my RB10 this week, Ty Chandler.
He got Mullins killed a few times though in that game.
Okay, that's
from
fair.
a pass protection standpoint. I don't know that like Alexander Madison's going to be so much better as a pass protector. They got to get him in there at some point, but like it was pretty wild that they dropped back that much, and the running back they had back there was that much of a bit of a mess in protection. So we'll see, but I agree with you that I don't think there's a chance they go back to Josh Dobbs. It sounds like if they start somebody else, it'll be Jaron Hall this week. And you QB 11 for Nick Mullins, so you were close, buddy. You were like 0.2 points away from being a top 10 quarterback. So if you didn't get that big Bryce Young performance, then you might have really been talking there. All right, 16th overall team, Houston Texans. Nico Collins in his return was 4th on the team in routes in week 16, but he trailed only Dalton Schultz in targets per route run. He did bail you out if you had to play him with a touchdown. I feel much better right now, though, with Nico Collins, with CJ Stroud likely to come back this week.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit briefly about CJ Stroud, whom I'm worried about, hopefully for no reason. But, oh, man, so the week before, when he played Denver, have you seen the footage going around that he took this hit and clearly in the fourth quarter he's wobbly and needs to have help and move him off the field, and then he returns to the game. As a weirdo who watches games that I have Survivor on too closely, in the Arizona game earlier this year, he took a massive helmet hit early in the third quarter of that game. The Texans were shut out. They were shut out in the second half at home against the Arizona, who has by far the worst fourth quarter point differential like ever. So at minimum, he suffered 3 concussions this year. It's not good. And you look at, I'm probably going to say it wrong, but the asphyxia or whatever the signs he was showing after this Broncos hit, he was out cold on the ground and they lift him up. It's scary stuff, man. I hope he's okay, obviously. But I mean, my point is, why is he rushing back? I mean, I don't know why they're playing him this week, but there's some concern regarding CJ Stroud and all these concussions. As a fantasy guy, I mean, or from the other side of the coin, I hope if he does return this week, you're using Collins, you're using Stroud. It's a good matchup. But man, Stroud's been hit to the head too many times this year.
No, you're definitely right to point that out. I think they're having him come back here because there's a little bit of blood in the water with Jacksonville. They're 8-7, tied, lead the division. Right now, they're the 8th seed in the AFC playoff race. Obviously, his health long term and his damn brain is more important than the AFC playoff race. But I think that's the reason they want to get him back. Is they can. New York Times gives them a 34% chance to make the playoffs, 50% chance to win the division with the way their schedule slates out here. But again, they have a chance here to push it into the postseason.
No, I hear that, and I actually have a ticket on them winning the division, so I appreciate that. But man, look into that, the details, the Denver Bronco game, the hit, and then 2 weeks before that, the Cardinals, and then obviously the one he suffered most recently. So it's just something to note.
17th overall team, Pittsburgh Steelers. George Pickens has 6 games under 40 receiving yards this year, 4 games over 100, obviously including the most recent one where him and Mason Rudolph dunked on the Cincinnati Bengals. George Pickens is just such a hard guy to figure out, man, because when he's dialed in and he's playing extremely well and the quarterback's giving him the ball on these in-breaking routes, he can be a great player. But it's just been so volatile this year. I had to just ignore all of the Twitter victory laps on George Pickens during that game. It's I mean, what are we talking about here? He's again, tough guy to figure out. I think he's a really, really good player. And I just want to see all these guys in a different offense with a different quarterback, but I'm not really sure. I'm just really not sure if we're going to get one next year with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
195 receiving yards on just 6 targets last week. But yeah, his role comes and goes. He's seen just 1 target in the red zone since week 9. 0 targets inside the 5 all year. I don't know. They could utilize him a little bit more there, given his frame, I would think. But yeah, he's a receiver with upside, but obviously going to be very mercurial and super frustrating and needs to learn how to block better.
Definitely needs to learn to block better. That was the thing that was so annoying. It's oh man, George Pickens showed up the media and showed up with the haters. Yeah, well, what are we talking about? He brought that situation on himself. But like I say, it's a sign of a good organization when you get the best out of a talented player like that. He ran the most routes on the team. He was involved right from the jump. That was the 3rd play that he housed for 80 plus yards. That's a sign of you've got a good head coach there when you don't have this crazy media week where he's just in the crosshairs with the effort and the blocking, and like Jaylen Warren's even out there saying, "Hey, I would have blocked for George Pickens." You could let that situation go to rot. Mike Tomlin did not, which is good because then you get the best out of a really talented, very good football player in George Pickens. Speaking of those Bengals, they're our 18th overall team here. T. Higgins only had a 21.4% target share in Week 16, tied with Andre Yoshivas. I don't know much about this dude, Dalton, but man, he was super athletic, and he was out there running a lot of routes with Jamar Chase out of the mix.
So last week, Higgins, I'm going to talk to you about process and outcome here. So Higgins faced Joey Porter, shadowed, like, I believe 32 of 40 routes, but one of the other 7 or 8 routes was an 80-yard touchdown. So, I mean, what do you do with that information? It shows, on one hand that you can still have a big fantasy performance against these elite corners, or the other, you don't really want to rely on that 80-yard touchdown catch every time. And it just so there's very few shadow corners these days in the league, but it just so happens he might get another one this week in L'Jarius Sneed. So just an interesting thing to think of. I mean, I'm gonna treat him as just as I did last week, top 25. Borderline top 20 fantasy wideout, given his, but you even said the target share wasn't as we expected, but that could have been the Porter factor. But it's just interesting to note that there's a few shadow corners in the league, but you can still be productive on the handful of routes if you blow up on the one time you don't get them. But it's funny that he's facing one of the others this week too, in Sneed.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say any of these guys are like prime Jalen Ramsey or prime Darrelle Revis or anything like that, where it's like, okay, this guy's going to shadow you across the field and he might completely blank you, right? Because it only takes 1 or 2 opportunities where, T. Higgins can make a massive play on one of these routes where he gets away from Joey Porter. You can also just win that matchup. That's another thing, though. I think it has to all be a piece of the puzzle, right? Because I think it's right to sit there and say, okay, he's got this matchup with Joey Porter, so his margin for error is going to be thinner. It's not 0 because Higgins is a quality player and he can get away from Porter and he can house that big touchdown, right? He's a good player. So it's all part of just like deciding where the margin for error is, and also just being like, okay, well, how good is T. Higgins as a player? How involved is he going to be in this offense? And I think slotting him somewhere in that top 25 is right, because I think there are other temptations to be like, okay, well, he's a top 5 ranked receiver when Jamar Chase is not in there, which is not the case.
Yeah, and I think another way of looking at it is just like a DFS decision helper. Because, yes, you're all starting Higgins if you have him without Chase just because of the projected volume, but it is something to consider when you're looking at matchups. So I would say more so DFS.
Yeah, right. And if like somebody just tackles him on that play, like, we're not having this conversation, right? I mean, or like the other corner does their job. But it's a zone coverage look, again.
Yeah.
Maybe Browning gets sacked on that play when he's running wide ass open. Anything can happen. Football's a hard game, man. It's a very thin margin for error game. And a lot of different things can be a factor in the whole final end results, which is why I, like you said, Dalton, look at the results versus the process and try to make the best decisions. It's the best decisions that you can. 19th overall team, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Over the last 3 weeks, Baker Mayfield leads all quarterbacks who have started all 3 games in passer rating and adjusted yards per attempt. I mean, dude, Baker is just balling out and he's just shoving it in my face left and right for being a big Baker hater. You got to give him credit, man. He's played awesome of late.
Yeah, the last 3 weeks, 9 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Wasn't he another Andy Barron's guy? He and Laporta.
Yes.
Good
Again, we will never say this on the pod with Andy Barron's, but an incredible call when he said that he was going to be the Geno Smith of this year on the Flip the Script series. We will never, because Barron's does not listen to the episodes that he is not on. There's no chance. But
way too big time for that.
Way too big time. He's got other things to play in his private jet and his yacht and everything like that. But it was a hell of a call, and give him all the credit for it.
Baker may get a New Orleans secondary still without Marshawn Lattimore, who's unlikely to return to practice this week. What more to say other than who needs Tom Brady when you have Baker, who's absolutely balling this year? No question about it. It's been impressive, and he's just fun to watch too. He makes like big runs every game and takes and finishes with contact and is fired up, and he's he has him playing well.
Yeah, he's like the peak of the Sam Howell kind of archetype. Like, he can get the ball to the playmakers, which has been a struggle in his career, but I think in an offense that really is well coached and well designed, which I think this Bucs offense is, he can get it to these guys, man. It's just it's a very interesting archetype of quarterback, right? And I think this next guy actually fits into this archetype as well. 20th overall team, Indianapolis Colts, season low 4.22 adjusted yards per attempt for Gardner Minshew last week without Michael Pittman, and it felt that way, man. It was a rough watch. Had them on one of my screens up here, the Colts and the Falcons, just because. I don't know. It was the best I could get in the early slate of games, with the games being so spread out. Not a great game for Gardner Minshew. I think obviously not having Pittman and getting Pittman scratched so late is another part of this too. That's what I think we don't talk about enough, is like the timing of when guys gets ruled out. Really, like that can have a big effect on the game plan. Like usually the game plan's just set, and now it's like, okay, well, we can't just change everything on Saturday because Michael Pittman gets ruled out super late. Was it like Friday, Saturday? I don't even remember here. They're just going to that offense with what it was, and that can definitely be bad from a defense and offense perspective.
And Atlanta has some good corners, but that was a tough watch. It's a good way of putting it. I saw him make some plays early on, but then it just seemingly they couldn't move the ball at all after that first possession. And then he gets another tougher matchup this week against the aforementioned Raiders D that's actually allowed, about the 10th fewest fantasy points quarterbacks lately. What about your guy Josh Downs? His yards per target I haven't looked at, but it's got to be among the bottom of the barrel here. Not on him, you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, he's a rookie slot receiver in an offense that's captained by Gardner Minshew. That's a big part of it here. I know he had 9 targets and fewer than 40 yards or something like that. But yeah, I don't know, man. I definitely think that Downs.
A couple weeks ago, we had 13 targets for 43 yards a month ago, too. It's been some. Yeah,
it's 7.2. I mean, it's not like the worst thing in the world. Okay. It's not like hideously low. But I think lately the late season stretch has not been great for Downs. But he also did say he's been dealing with a knee injury.
Playing through a knee injury,
with it all year. Yeah. Yep. So. Yep. I think Downs will be a good player when they get Anthony Richardson back and, they kind of figure this offense more out. But I mean, this is tough. Like when you have a really well-coached team and they're really well equipped to get the ball to the best player on the team. And as Josh Downs, you are not the best player on the team. You're always going to suffer a little bit, I think, from a production standpoint, especially again, when your quarterback is as limited as Gardner Minshew is. Speaking of crowded receiver rooms, number 20, first overall team, Seattle Seahawks. First read target shares since week 13 in the Seahawks offense. Tyler Lockett, team high 25.5, JSN 23.6, DK Metcalf 22.6%. It's just tough to parse this receiver room out when all these guys are so close. And I don't think there's a talent gap here between any of these guys. I think they're all, in terms of how good they all are right now, it's very condensed. So you get games like last week against the Titans. Lockett has a lot of catches, stuff like that. JSN has a fine game. Metcalf gets the touchdown. It's just with a kind of where they're at from a quarterback and a pass game standpoint, you're not going to get anybody really standing out here. They're all going to kind of X each other out a little bit from an upside standpoint.
Love to hear the JSN praise. And speaking of Joey Porter Jr., he may get shadowing DK Metcalf here. So if you're going to use that as a tiebreaker, that's definitely a possibility here. So, Lockett's had a disappointing year overall, but he's coming on, and JSN could say the same. But yeah, an even distribution there lowers all of their fantasy upside, unfortunately. Kenneth Walker, I could see having a really nice game here at home. He's very game script dependent, but in this matchup at home against Pittsburgh, I really like K9 here.
I like that call out. 22nd overall team. Very disappointing. Jacksonville Jaguars. Jags actually lead the NFL in expected dropback rate and actual dropback rate in weeks 13 to 16, according to Sam Hoppen. Dude, I really feel like Jacksonville is falling apart at the seams, and I'm pretty concerned about how this team's going to operate the next couple of weeks and into the playoffs if they do indeed make the postseason, which they probably will win that division and everything. I mean, I guess I'm pretty shook from what I'm seeing out of the Jags right now. How are you feeling about Jacksonville Bags at this point?
So when did Trevor Lawrence suffer that injury? Because I almost tweeted it's malpractice. He's still in this game, and then he left like a drive after. But I may have suffered it earlier. But anyway, what was he doing in that absolute blowout, coming off that concussion in which he rushed him back from? Too another just crazy decision there. Although I appreciate it as someone with Calvin Ridley, that was a very awesome garbage time second half there. My guy ETN. Definitely been struggling and slowed down with that heavy workload. They got just absolutely blown out against Tampa Bay last week. Just bad there. So, Yeah, Trevor Lawrence, he can make all the throws. He can run for a guy his size, but I just don't know if he's it. He throws the ball too hard on these touch passes, kind of like Herbert kind of does that too. But I don't know, just something's there. And I think Trevor Lawrence, we just have to all realize and come to grips that he looks like the 10th to 15th best quarterback in the NFL, and we're not going to see anything better than that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I think if he has Matt Ryan's career, are you disappointed by that? I would say no, because Matt Ryan had a great career, but I think it's within the context of, oh, he's a generational prospect, the best since Andrew Luck, the best since John Elway, that type of stuff. It seems and feels disappointing, but like when I watch Trevor Lawrence, I see a guy that you can win with and maybe even win because of, but he's not. I mean, it seems stupid to say this, but like, he's not Mahomes. He's probably not Josh Allen. Like, I think he's in that next group down where you need to surround him with I also watch this team and I feel like they have not helped him at all from an offensive design standpoint, and they haven't helped the receivers in a lot of ways either. I think it is going to be, again, regardless of how the season finishes, because even if they make the playoffs, I think they can get whooped in the first round by, I feel so much better about the Browns right now than I do about the Jags, right? But
oh yeah,
I think there needs to be, regardless of how the season ends, some really hard and difficult conversations in Jacksonville about, all right, we have a quarterback that's good. He should be good enough. Maybe he's not, like I said, an elite player worthy of all the hype that he got from being the first overall pick and a generational prospect and all that stuff. But like, that stuff doesn't matter at this point. Like, you need to now like win games and set your team up for success. And I don't think that they did that this offseason with some of the personnel moves. I mean, Tank Bigsby, that was a disaster. Some of the offensive line stuff is rough, but I think schematically they have really let this offense down and let it kind of go to waste here especially as the season has worn on.
Yeah, losing Kirk didn't help, and now another tougher matchup against the Panthers this week, and we're in doubt, it looks like, Trevor Lawrence's status with that shoulder injury too, so he may be getting better.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Zay Jones is not that good. Like, he's a fourth receiver, but he
matters too. Yeah,
but he matters so much, bro. Like, that's not good. It's not good if like, oh no, we don't have Zay Jones. What are we gonna do? Like, that's not good if Zay Jones is like anything close to a Jenga piece for your offense. 23rd overall team. Let's move on. My God. 23rd overall team, LA Rams. This one comes in from @DetroitLions313 on Twitter. Rams offense with Matthew Stafford, Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, and Cooper Kupp on the field at the same time in 2023. First in EPA per play, dropback EPA, dropback success rate, rushing success rate, points per drive, yards per drive, rushing EPA. I mean, that's pretty crazy when you consider what we thought of guys like Puka and Kyren prior to the season. It's crazy that they've been that big of difference makers, but they really, really have. Stafford, I think, has played great this season, and Kupp finally seems like he's healthy again. So I don't know, man. Rams are really dangerous and probably like a top 5 ecosystem in the NFL right now.
Yeah, absolutely. When they're healthy like this, really helpful for fantasy managers as well. Could be a fun Detroit Lions, Rams first round of the playoffs matchup there. Everyone says Stafford revenge game, but really isn't that more the Goff revenge game there? Considering Stafford went on to win the Super Bowl.
100%.
So DeMarcus Robinson, I want to just talk about him a little bit. It's deeper leagues or whatever, but he's took over that number 3 role before Atwell got hurt, or at minimum was splitting. I mean, he was running 20 plus routes back since week 12. So he's developed as their third, and maybe he'll split with a healthier Atwell, but gives him another dimension there. And Kyren Williams is good, man. He's not just that McVay likes him. He's a good player and maybe should have been drafted higher. So this is a fun offense that also gives defensively. Yes, they were playing better in the first half of the season. This secondary of no names is actually being a bit more forgiving. So that's good for fantasy, both sides, higher scoring. So with Tyrod Taylor this week, I could see it producing on both sides for us in fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a knock on wood situation, but I think the reason that some of these guys like fell in the draft, I mean, Puka for sure, and even Kyron Williams, like there were injury concerns because he's a smaller back. Puka had an injury late in college career. It's like there's a reason that we're saying when all these guys are on the field at the same time, right? From a EPA and all these high rankings perspectives, and Cooper Kupp, like there are injury concerns late in his career. You just hope this thing can last. That's all I hope, because man, these guys are so good and they're so fun to watch. 24th overall team, Buffalo Bills. Stephon Diggs had the highest target share and first read target share among all pass catchers in week 16. Obviously the results were not there. He ran just 18 routes. Like, I think when I watch Stephon Diggs, I don't think like, oh man, this guy's cooked or anything like that. And I'm going to really chart this out and have something on it later in the week. But man, it's like this Buffalo offense is just really different than the group that we've seen in the past, where it was just Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and that's it. I mean, Gabe Davis's role, obviously not last week, but has been completely marginalized too, because they just have other options to go to. And I think a lot of that is what's going on with this whole Diggs slump as we end the season.
Over his last 9 games, it's averaging his 50 receiving yards. I know he slumped at the end of last year too, but what is going on here? Because it's not like Gabe Dave is balling. So the last couple of games, there's been, fewer dropbacks for Allen. But yeah, I don't know. His ECR took a hit this week. His expert consensus rank, I think, dropped him down to like 15th wide receiver when he's been top 10 all year long. So people are getting fed up with him, and now a tougher matchup against New England. So yeah, his ECR is wide receiver 14 this year. So this week. So obviously you're starting him, but he has not returned value even close as a guy who was drafted consistently as a top 8 pick in the first round.
Which is crazy because he started this year looking like one of the right answers, at wide receiver. And now he's receiver 10 overall on the year. He's just cleared 1,000 yards. He has 8 touchdowns. He has 96 catches. Like, those end of season numbers are not going to tell the story of how, like, he was fantastic to start the year. Looked like he was having a career year, and then he's really slowed down here of late. But if he finishes strong the next 2 weeks, I'm not going to be surprised by that either. Because again, I think it's just like, he's clearly the most important player in this passing game as the target share and the first read target over the last 3 weeks. These have held over the last 3 weeks, really, that he is the highest targeted player in the offense. First read targets are there. There's just been some missed opportunities both from him and Allen. And then again, they have other options to go to at this point, which has not been the case in the past few seasons in Buffalo.
He hasn't been a top 45 fantasy receiver in 5 of the last 6 weeks. And that other one, he was not even top 12. So it's been a real disaster for him here. But yeah, hopefully he turns it around the final 2 games. But the Bills are going to need him if they want to make a playoff run. They're going to need him to start being an alpha again with the rest of that offense. I know James Cook has taken some of the load here, but man, we need Diggs to be Diggs again.
Completely agree. A team that I don't think is going to make a big playoff run at this point is our 25th overall team, Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs ranked 12th in plays per drive in week 16, but 23rd in yards per drive. I mean, this was the first game I watched all year where I was like, yeah, I got to give up like the ghost on thinking, well, they have Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, because like eventually players start developing bad habits and they get dragged down by awful situations. And this Chiefs situation is truly, truly awful.
Yeah, and the Raiders are weirdly an especially bad matchup for the Chiefs passing attack because Nate Hobbs is their best corner and he plays a slot. That's where Rice runs 51% of his routes. I do like Rice to bounce back this week big time here. And we need to pay attention to the running back situation. How weird was that? Pacheco's helmet goes flying off 2 plays and he gets concussion. I mean, what's up with the strap there? But if there's no McKinnon and there's no Pacheco, Edwards-Helaire is absolutely a fantasy option here. And let's see where he is in the he's a minimum in Yahoo DFS, $10. So that'll be a smash spot there if the Pacheco doesn't play in this game. Because yes, the Chiefs offense really, really bad, really struggling, not good, and nothing what we're accustomed to in the past at all. But still, implied team total this week, 25.8 points, 5th most in the league this week. So
yeah, great matchup against Cincinnati, who has a lot of issues on defense. 26th overall team, Dallas Cowboys. This one comes in from Denny Carter of NBC Sports. Tony Pollard has the 5th most expected fantasy points among running backs this season. So you have that going for you, which is nice.
I hope if you haven't seen it, go look at the footage of him. It looks like surely he's going to score this touchdown on the photo, and somehow he does not find his way in the end zone. If you juxtaposition Breece Hall's 3-yard touchdown run when there's all these defenders in front of him, it's a pretty cool tweet.
Funny.
Look for that. Look for it. It's pretty good. But Pollard's been a disappointment all year. I know his tackle numbers have been better over the last 6 weeks or so. He is getting healthier there, but I forget the overall numbers, but the carries inside the 5 this year or at the goal line for him have been a disaster. He's converted 2 of them, and he's had among the league leaders in there. So it's been frustrating, and I'll take the L on that one. I hyped him, had him as my number 2 fantasy back entering the year. One of the players probably the player I've been the most wrong on. Him or Rachaad White are the 2 I was the most wrong on this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was wrong about Rachaad White as well. But yeah, man, it has been a disaster for Tony Pollard at the goal line. This one from Adam Levitan. Tony Pollard has 11 carries from inside the 5-yard line. Inside the 5-yard line this season, right? He has scored 2 touchdowns on those plays. All right, 27th overall team, Cleveland Browns. Skipping them for Thursday Night Football. 28, Detroit Lions. Jahmyr Gibbs is averaging 6.8 yards per carry over the last 4 weeks. But he's at just 2.5 yards per target, which is funny when you think about the Jahmyr Gibbs profile coming into the season. Like 2.5 yards per target. I'm not saying that Jahmyr Gibbs is secretly bad or anything. Like, it's again, just when you think about, I got Dalton, shout out to you. I remember on the post-draft pod, you saying like you were going to hype, Jahmyr Gibbs to the moon in like PPR leagues, right? I mean, you were right to do that because he's been an awesome fantasy pick this year, but I don't think it's been in the way that many people expected. Like, people expected him to be unleashed as a receiving threat. And I actually think that he hasn't really been unleashed as a receiving threat. He's just been awesome as a running back. I saw Scott Bischoff, who does great work for Football Guys. He's been one of my dudes, one of my friends in the industry over the years. He compared him to like Jamal Charles, and then someone replied to that and said that actually Nate Tice and Robert Mays made the same comparison on their podcast recently, and I love that. When I replied to Scott this morning, I was like, I love that comparison. He does kind of look like Jamal Charles out there, like. Dude, Jahmyr Gibbs is just a straight up baller. And like I said, he hasn't even been fully maximized as a receiver. He's just been a great running back. Like, after we talked about him earlier in Eckler's Edge, like some of the changes he could implement to get the best out of his skill set, he's implemented all those changes and more, and been like straight up one of the best running backs in the NFL this season.
Top 3 fantasy back each of the last 2 weeks, despite just 6 total catches over that span. The 5.7 yards per carry looks a lot like Jamal Charles as well. I love that comp. The broken tackle last week, you haven't seen that highlight, go find that one. But it was just this one of the sickest of the year. So many different angles you could look at. It was awesome.
I saw that. It was awesome.
Yeah. So He's been awesome, even with a healthy David Montgomery, and even getting some goal line looks. So Gibbs, he's going to be a fun one to draft in fantasy leagues next year for sure. He looks awesome and so fun to watch, as you said. Just looking awesome out there.
Hey, let me throw this at you. We were doing a first round, way too early mock draft for FFL tomorrow. We're doing it ahead of time. Peel back the curtain. Sorry to ruin the magic of internet TV. I had the 9th overall pick, and I had taken 2 receivers beforehand because it's only 4 of us doing a 12-man mock draft. It's whatever. Anyways, I took Breece Hall 9th overall, but I strongly considered Jahmyr Gibbs at that 9th overall spot. Gibbs didn't get drafted by either of the other 3 guys, those final 3 picks in the first round. Who would you rather have, Breece Hall or Jahmyr Gibbs next season? I
think I'm with you on my guy Hall, but yeah, whoever they passed up probably be a mistake over Gibbs. 4 carries inside the 10.
Kyren, Bijan, and Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, okay. Those Kyren, maybe. I'm not sure I would go there, but yeah, Bijan, I get it. Yeah, Bijan and Gibbs is going to be a fun debate for sure next year. But Gibbs, 4 carries inside the 10 last week. 4 carries, 2 inside the 5, and that's with a healthy Montgomery. So yeah, I wouldn't push back on Gibbs over Bijan next year. And those 3 would be throwing Kyren in there just feels wrong. But Bijan, Gibbs, and Breece Hall will be a real fun debate at fantasy draft tables next year for sure.
Yeah, but then you look at like the production and the role from Kyren, and you're like, what?
No doubt.
It feels wrong, but it might be right.
But I know, but we said the same thing with Cam Akers last year too, and then it just it switches like that. But just the pedigree's not quite there. But totally understood Kyren. Yeah, but I rank him as my number 2 back this week. I love him.
There's no question that just again it's the Lions section here. Like Jahmyr Gibbs, dude, is just incredible. Like the way he has blossomed in the second half of the year. And it's just another great example. Like, be patient with some of these rookies sometimes. Okay. Like, especially at the running back position. Like, I know we think of it as, oh, just drop them in and they just go. That was not the case with Gibbs. And there was a reason Montgomery was getting all those carries early on, and he's still playing involved in the offense, but he is just like a true difference maker. And my last point on this too, I think we do kind of need to change our view about running backs, like in the first round of drafts. Like, Jahmyr Gibbs is just a walking explosive play. Like, I don't care that he has RB next to his name. You can't tell me he doesn't change the way the Lions offense operates. So I think ultimately it was a good draft pick by them, even though he has RB attached to his name.
Gibbs, I will say, has an argument to be the number one fantasy back. Well, Christian McCaffrey is going to put the number 2 fantasy back next year, given they play indoors, that environment, the team scores a bunch of points, and they have a high rush rate over expectation. So he's really is, and there's more target equity there. Absolutely, that's in his profile to really expand in his game there, even if he's just, Kamara type. But there's more to his rushing game. Maybe this is Jamal Charles. So absolutely, Gibbs will have an argument to be the number 2 ranked fantasy back next year. And before we leave Detroit, I know we've talked a little bit too much about them, is Jamison Williams is quietly becoming a full-time player for what it's worth. I know he still makes bonehead plays and is a long way to go as a route runner, but he is developing into their clear number 2 finally.
29th overall team, Miami Dolphins. Tua Tagovailoa hasn't cleared 300 yards passing since week 11, and he's had multiple passing touchdowns in just one game in that 5-game span. I don't even think this is like an anti-Tua stat. It's just this team has really changed in the back half of the year where their defense is balling out, and obviously that helps them lead on the run game as well.
Yeah, and a tough matchup in Baltimore this week probably without Jalen Waddle if he really has a high ankle sprain, and obviously a banged up Tyreek Hill and a banged up Mostert. But Tua's played well this year. I think it is a reflection of their defense and their rushing attack, the volume more to do with his performance waning lately or anything like that. But this is going to be a tough matchup this week.
30th overall team, Philadelphia Eagles. Expected fantasy points per game since week 14 when Dallas Goedert returned, according to Fantasy Points Data's model. A.J. Brown, 18.3. Dallas Goedert, 12.0. Devontae Smith, 11.5. So it really does seem that when Goddard's out there, A.J. Brown gets a huge boost, even though Devontae Smith is coming off a big game.
Yep. That's the way it's been since last year. And I would just like that about DeAndre Swift, who's been tackled at the 1-yard line without scoring on that same drive, an NFL high 6 times this year.
It feels like 60.
I know it really does, but they're actually running the ball way more than last year. Like the rush rate over expectation, and obviously a matchup at home against Arizona is absolutely as good as it gets. I mean, they've allowed by far the most fantasy points recently to the position, and they're a big favorite. So I do like DeAndre Swift to put up a big fantasy performance in the championship.
31st overall team, San Francisco 49ers, your 49ers. Sam Darnold had a 8.2 average depth of throw in week 16. Brock Purdy was at 6.8. Darnold might start. What do you think? Do you think Purdy's going to play in week 16 against the Commanders with this shoulder stinger? I don't think I think any talk that Sam Darnold he was great against the Ravens, I'm not there. I don't think Purdy had as disaster of a game as what the final stats show. He started pressing and some tips happened. He just got unlucky with some of these throws, even if they were bad decisions. I don't know, man. What do you think is going to happen with this 49ers quarterback situation in week 17, excuse me?
Yeah, Shanahan appears to be not overly concerned about it if it is indeed a stinger, but I mean, I hope it's not a concussion. Yeah, a healthy Shanahan appears to be confident that Purdy will be healthy. What are we making of the? I don't really want to get in a big long Purdy discussion here, but I will say I'm mildly surprised how much his MVP odds just completely tanked. I mean, now we have Jackson is the favorite. And Purdy fell to 4th or 5th. It just depends on what site you're at. But even seen 12-1 odds. Some poor sap sold a not the guy who bought it was a guy had a Purdy ticket to win $200,000 in Las Vegas, and he sold it on prop swap for $125K last week. So the guy who bought that $125K he's even worse than I am on my with my ticket because at least the I didn't pay that much last week, but So he leads the NFL in EPA still, and Lamar Jackson's 11th, but Jackson's now the favorite, and that stinker on primetime really just tanked his odds, I guess, just completely there. Because you look at his season-long stats, that resume still wins MVP 8 days a week. But I get it. Purdy's different than everyone else.
Purdy is definitely different. You have that performance. Like it would have been one thing if they lost that game, but it's like the fact that there are just by the way, his box score was probably a little overrated coming into this game. It's probably a little overstated how bad he was in that game against the Ravens. Like I think that game had more to do with the Baltimore Ravens defense being incredible and the Ravens team being incredible than it was that like Purdy pissed in his pants or anything like that. I mean, again, he didn't have his best performance, but he got unlucky on sometimes those tip balls happen and the defender doesn't catch them, right? Like, and then we're on to the next play. We're keeping the drive alive, but they were just overmatched. He was overmatched. And once the Ravens offense kicked things into gear, it was like, oh, this team's not built to come from behind. It's like, well, why do you think they're not built to come from behind? I don't know. It's kind of a it's kind of a weird take that people have with that whole stuff.
Well,
so yeah,
Shanahan's 0-28 in his career when down 8+ points in the fourth quarter.
Right, and most teams don't win a lot of those games. Like it's
but
0-28
though is You're right. I mean, the record overall of teams like that are horrible, but still, you think one, and he has these quarterbacks, who hit and hitters play and hitters counts is the thing. So that's the argument. But Purdy short passes, 4 for 14, 29 yards, 3 picks. Intermediate passes, he was fine against the Ravens, but so he really just struggled on these passes less than 10 yards. And props to the Ravens defense and McDonald. It looks like a future head coach candidate because it looked like they had the answers to the test, and they even said we can't reveal state secrets afterward. Like they knew, Purdy has some tells or my guy Shanahan's offense. But boy, I'd love a rematch there. The Ravens just, ruined my ticket. Was not a decent amount of money there. Very, very frustrating. And they beat the Niners in the Super Bowl last time. So let's have a rematch. Bring on the Ravens. I'm wanting them in Vegas, but the Niners getting their asses kicked in prime time. That was wild. Just walking out of that stadium in a blowout. It was a quite an environment. Props to the Ravens, who I didn't see that coming.
Two things. As a neutral observer, I would love a Ravens-Niners Super Bowl. I thought that game was awesome. And I wouldn't even end result. Yeah, it ended up being a blowout. But for the most of the first half, it was like, this is a tightly competitive game. I think it's just the fact that the Ravens scored 3 times in such quick succession and then they just couldn't pass their way out of it. It ended up feeling and looking and kind of having the vibe of a blowout, but I wouldn't call that. Again, you can call it that because it is what it is, but for most of the game, it didn't feel like it was going to be a blowout. But I want to talk about the Ravens, 32nd overall team here. The Ravens rank 3rd in neutral pass rate since week 14. Obviously that is when they returned from their bye. They faced the Rams, the Jags, and then the 49ers in that span. And I just can't say enough good things about the way Baltimore's offense, their passing game particularly, is coming together right now. Like they just have so many answers. They have so many different guys they can throw at you. Isaiah likely looks like a beast, or at least looks like a really good player. Zay Flowers is awesome. Like Bateman comes up, he makes some disaster plays, heartbreaking plays, but then he comes up big for some catches. Beckham comes up big at times too, but again, like Zay Flowers and Lamar Jackson just balling out right now, and Lamar just makes the whole thing go, man. He has a chance definitely to cement the MVP stuff with these final 2 games, Miami especially on Sunday, and then obviously Pittsburgh week 18. But yeah, man, it just again can't say enough good things with how the Ravens pass game is coming together.
Their TD drives against the Niners were from the 47, the 44, and the 9. So that definitely helped them. But it looks like Lamar is gonna. You're right. If they win in Miami, it's a tougher matchup too. That absolutely may cement it because then they'll get them the 1 seed locked up as well.
It's at home. It's
sorry against Miami. Yeah. Sorry against Miami. Sorry. Zay Flowers was impressive. Even earning an end zone target. That was part of my against you earlier. I'm like fantasy. He's not going to score that many touchdowns, but man, he's out there earning end zone targets and 13 or whatever. It was impressive performance. Against a pretty good secondary. So if he develops further, and Isaiah likely seemingly just kind of replace that Mark Andrews role. It's too bad this team lost Keaton Mitchell and Dobbins because that would be super dangerous if they had a more dynamic back. But as is, they got Jackson back there. What an awesome, electrifying run that one highlight was. And yeah, he makes it work. And as Nick Bosa was saying, just a ton of credit to him because he switched up how he would hang back in the pocket at the beginning of the year. But boy, he got the ball out quick against that Niners pass rush and just totally played differently than he had this season. So yeah, man, the ability to adjust like that. Sure, Lamar, he's pretty good at football.
Very good at football. All right, let's talk Thursday Night Football here. We've got Browns, we've got Jets. Our Browns stat, Joe Flacco has cleared 41 pass attempts in every game this season, which is wild. And we talked about Breece Hall. He's our Jets stat. Breece Hall is tied with Alvin Kamara for the most targets among running backs with 84. And, some of that's fake because Alvin Kamara plays with the checkdown king there in New Orleans. He's also tied with Christian McCaffrey for the most yards among running backs through the air with 537. I think that's interesting. Just those two numbers are tied. But Breece Hall has been awesome as a receiver. He was awesome as a receiver last week. What do we think about this game, man? Because obviously, again, offensive perspective, we just love the way the Browns are playing right now with Flacco. But obviously, it's a tough defensive matchup.
Yeah, the Browns are incredibly tough. They're allowing 3.5 yards per play at home this season. The next lowest is Baltimore at 4.4, almost a full yard difference there. The Flacco, it's wild that they trust Flacco more than Deshaun Watson just immediately. That's crazy. But back to the Browns defense. Breece Hall, you love to see all those targets from Simeon, and we're going to see that again. And the Browns do allow some receiving production to opposing backs, but it's just an incredibly tough matchup. Their implied team total is 13.5 points. That is the lowest in the league this week. So, I mean, you probably hope you have alternatives to Hall and Garrett Wilson in your fantasy championship. Just kind of depends. I mean, what do you think?
A little more concerned for Wilson than I would be for Breece Hall, just because that receiving work is pretty good in terms of boosting his floor. And you'd think they want to get the ball out fast, the screen game, stuff like that. And the Browns have had injury issues on the course of their defense. So I don't know. I feel okay with I mean, look, I have Breece Hall on a championship roster, and I'm not benching Breece Hall after what he did last week. So that's where I stand on it. And I mean, I don't have a viable alternative to Breece Hall on this particular team, so I'm rocking with him. It is what it is, but I get being concerned about it for sure.
Yeah, I know you're probably using him if you have him, especially coming off last week. Very impressive performance, but he just goes from basically about as dramatic as it gets as far as matchups against Washington and now the tough one. But man, I almost want him to just have a couple quiet games to end the year so his ADP remains gettable next year. But let's talk Amari Cooper. Do you realize that last week not only did he become, I believe, the second player other than T.O. to have 3 games of 175 yards on 3 different teams. But he also had the second most unrealized air yards last week. So he's putting up 250 real yards, and then having this 100 plus unrealized air yards too. So just silliness from this Flacco passing offense. And Cooper, how dare you do that on the road? I'm sure you would have been in my DFS lineup if you've been at home. But just an amazing.
But the home road splits. What happened?
I know. Just Flacco's to providing all those opportunities. But like with the Jets though here. The Browns have a completely different matchup too.
Yeah.
Houston is giving up a ton of fantasy points through the air, where the Jets are the opposite, and they're the toughest matchup for opposing wide receivers. So there's a reason this game's over-under is 34.5 points.
Yeah, the Jets, since week 10, so this is not a group on defense that's packed it in, despite what the offense has been doing. They're 4th in dropback EPA. They are 5th in dropback success rate allowed since week 10. So, but again, I'm not benching Amari Cooper after what he did in that matchup, right? So I don't know, man. I think like him and Njoku are still these are still 2 guys you got to start. Flacco, but what about streaming Flacco? Like in a revenge game for old Joe Flacco? I don't know how much Joe really cares because he's so stoic, but you got to think he wants to show up the Jets a little bit after they didn't even think to call him when their season went to hell. I just don't know how, if you're a Jets fan, you're not looking at this that could have been us. He's probably not having this season. Let me say that again. He's definitely not having this season, Joe Flacco, with the New York Jets, because I mean, the Browns' offensive line is not like an elite unit now. It is banged up severely. Like they're on backups on that offensive line. So just keep that in mind. But so much of what this weird, beautiful, odd couple marriage between Kevin Stefanski and Joe Flacco is just like Stefanski's a great offensive coach and he just trusts Flacco to run the offense. The Jets do not have a great offensive coach. They have Nathaniel Hackett. So he wouldn't be having this season with the Jets most likely, but still as a Jets fan, if I was one, I'd be looking over there like that could have been us.
Oh, the Jets would absolutely be in the playoffs if they signed Flacco right away after Rodgers' injury, I think at least. But maybe that's off base. This week, Flacco, I do not like using him at all. The Jets have allowed by far the fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, schedule adjusted over the last 5 weeks. And even as importantly, he's not going to be pushed. I mean, the Jets aren't going to score. So, I mean, this seems like a defensive battle. Absolutely look for alternatives other than our guy Flacco in your fantasy championship, just because of the matchup. I mean, I know he's due to regress some, but I love all this volume, and I think it's going to be fun. And they're a tough out in the playoffs with that defense. But this week in fantasy, it's a bad spot for Flacco.
I am looking at Dalton's fantasy rankings. He has Joe Flacco at QB 17. Couple names. I mean, Jordan Love, Gardner Minshew, Nick Mullins, Derek Carr. You'd play Derek Carr over Joe Flacco?
Probably, but my rankings are a bit, they're not finalized this week, given I was,
sure.
hold up all That's Tuesday. True. But so don't hold those completely in concrete. But no, I actually like Carr this week in Tampa Bay. But yeah, no, I would play him over Flacco. Flacco don't play this week. I should even lower him. His ECR is QB 20. I have him even too high. So I really don't like this matchup here. But what a fun story straight off the couch, and Amari Cooper just carrying fantasy teams. But the takeaway here is Cooper and Breece Hall have basically the opposite of matchups than they had last week. So they carried you to get here. Keep your expectations lowered Thursday night.
Maybe some Baker Mayfield action for you if you need a replacement for Joe Flacco.
No question. Easy.
All right, Dalton. Good podcast, buddy. We ran through all 32 teams here heading into week 17. A lot of stuff, little future projections, little week 17 stuff. All good things with you here on Stat Nerd Thursday. I hope the rest of your week is better than the start of your week, buddy.
Appreciate you, man. Good times as always, Harmon.
All right, that's going to do it for us today, folks. Scott Pianowski. You need Scott Pianowski to help you on the viewer's guide for week 17. He is going to be on tomorrow's podcast and on the recap at the end of the week as well. But until then, we're out.